Hi everyone, Peter here from Movement and Performance, and in this video we're going to be talking about the principle of specificity and the transfer of training. So the principle of specificity is essentially how specific an exercise is to the physical requirements of the sport. So this is the most important principle because if we're not training with specificity in mind, we are simply just training and hoping that we get better at our sport. But if we train with a specific goal in mind and train appropriately, we can then actually plan so that we have transfer to our sporting performance. So specificity is, we can't really quantify it, but essentially theoretically it exists on a spectrum rather than this is specific or this isn't specific. So if we take the example, a very simple example of powerlifting, so we'll take the back squat that they do in powerlifting, and we can sort of look at exercises on a general to specific scale. So the most, not the most general, but a general exercise we can do that can have some transfer to our 1RM back squat that we're going to be performing in competition is something like a front squat for 10 reps. So it's not quite that specific to our competition lift, but it will have some transfer. And then something a bit more specific will be maybe a high bar back squat for 5 reps. And then in competition, our most specific thing we can do is a low bar back squat, and in the competition equipment and under the competition conditions. So the correct depth and with the appropriate gear that we're allowed to wear. It gets a little bit more difficult when we talk about more complex sports, something like a team sport like soccer. So something very general that can help our performance can be like a back squat, but where that lies on the spectrum, because the qualities required in soccer is not simply one lift. There's a lot of things we need to actually work on. So although the back squat will have some performance enhancement qualities, it's very difficult to actually put it into context how general, how specific it is. So if then we move a little bit more specific, we can have something like repeated sprints. And then the most specific thing we can do for soccer is to play an actual 90-minute match against an opponent. So I've put this question here, is that does functional equal specific? So you hear a lot of sort of functional movement or functional screens or all that sort of stuff, and essentially what they're referring to is specificity. So if it's functional, it's basically specific to the sport, and it will have transfer. So moving on to the transfer of training. This is similar to the principle of specificity, except now we're going to be talking about actually improvements in performance. So we know that adaptations are specific. So if we get better at one exercise, then we got better at that exercise. However, when we actually improve our ability at one exercise or one quality, it can also have positive transfer to exercises that are similar. And the more specific the exercise is to that one that we just improved, the greater the transfer will be. So if we look at this very general example here, let's say we increase our back squat 1RM by 20%. We might then have a 15% increase in our front squat 1RM because it's quite a similar movement, similar velocities, similar movement pattern, similar muscle groups involved. And that 20% increase in our back squat 1RM might also have a 10% transfer to our clean 1RM. So obviously only half of the amount because it's starting to look a little bit like a different movement. Our 10-meter sprint might be enhanced by around 5%, and then our 50-meter sprint may be 2.5%. And this is because the more similar, so the front squat is more similar to the back squat than the clean, which is more similar to the back squat than a sprint. So the more similar, the more specific the exercise is, the more positive transfer there will be from the exercise that we're training. So the question is, how specific do we need to get? because we know the most specific thing we can do is to play the actual sport, but if we just play the actual sport, we may plateau. So how specific we need to be at a given time is going to be dependent on many factors, like the athlete's age, their training age, their preferences for training. This is a big one, the time of year, like the phase of training that we're in, and the sport that they are playing. So things that will training that will require greater specificity will be in older athletes, more experienced athletes, and when they're closer to competition. Less specificity will come about in younger athletes with less training age, less training experience, and further from competition. All these factors will probably lead to less specific training. So if we take this example, we got Usain Bolt, 3-time Olympic champion, versus these kids who are just running on a track. The training of Usain Bolt is going to look a lot different to these kids, especially when he's in his sort of preparatory training for the Olympics or World Championships, compared to these kids who probably don't have competitions of anywhere near that magnitude. So now we're going to be talking about potentiation, which is moving on and still in line with the transfer of training. It's basically that we want to use our general training methods to improve the performance of more specific exercises. So basically, if we go back to the transfer of training, we want to use these more general exercises to improve these exercises. And we want to progress that from general to specific. So an example, a sprinting example, could be we could do heavy sled pulls following in one block of training, following short acceleration drills that are unloaded, so not with sleds. And then we might move on to maximum velocity running drills, followed by speed endurance training, which can be the most specific. So as you can see, each block that we're doing actually potentiates the following block. So the heavy sled pulls are going to improve our just general strength and our general acceleration abilities, which is then going to transfer when we do these unweighted short acceleration drills. And then if we get better at that, hopefully our maximum velocity will actually increase. And then once we have our maximum velocity up, we can then implement that into more specific running type training, such as a 200-meter sprint or something like that, where we're actually taking that maximum speed we've developed, and we are now trying to hold that over a prolonged period of time. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you got something out of it. If you haven't already, you can follow Movement and Performance on social media. So you can follow Movement and Performance on Facebook and Instagram with the links here. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe on YouTube for more informative videos in the future. On Facebook and Instagram, you'll find these research infographics, which is basically taking the latest research and putting them into these simple and understandable pictures so that you can stay up to date with the latest research. So thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you got something out of it. I'll see you in the next one.